Hi, my name's Cian Brennan. I'm a designer and videographer based in Dublin. I'm self-employed and I make videos for a living. After I graduated in 2013, I moved to London and about 8 months later I wound up getting diagnosed with leukemia. I'm making this video to answer a lot of the questions that people ask me when they find out that I've had leukemia and had a bone marrow transplant as a result. So, what is leukemia? Leukemia is a form of bone marrow cancer, and basically bone marrow is where your blood is made. So your blood is composed of different types of blood cells. So you have red blood cells that transport oxygen, you have platelets that clot wounds, and then you have white blood cells that fight infection. And basically all that leukemia is your bone marrow not working properly and releasing immature white blood cells into your bloodstream. And when that happens, basically, your blood becomes incapable of fighting infection, and often that's how it winds up becoming fatal. So what is a bone marrow transplant? Well, a lot of people think that a bone marrow transplant is a type of surgical operation, and it's not. At least not for the person receiving the donation. For the person giving a donation of bone marrow cells, it is surgery that's required to extract them. But for the person receiving the donation, it's more like a blood transfusion. So what happens first is you're given high amounts of chemo and radiation to suppress your immune system, and then you get a transfusion of bone marrow cells, like a blood transfusion, and the bone marrow cells find their way into your body and into your bone marrow and somehow magically take root and replace your bone marrow entirely, which is your immune system basically. So it's sort of like pressing the reset button on your immune system. Don't ask me how the process works exactly. It's sort of magic, but it does. So one of the most common questions that people ask me is, how did I find out? And I think that people are often asking that question because they hope to be able to spot the signs early themselves, for themselves or their family or their friends. But the truth is that the symptoms were very innocuous. I was very fatigued and I was feeling chills and aches and pains in my joints. But really, those things could be explained away by the fact that I was perhaps feeling stressed or not eating right or not sleeping right. I had lost a lot of weight in the run-up to being diagnosed, but again, a change in circumstances, could lead to any of the symptoms that I felt. So really, the only way that I really found out was when at one point I became so tired that I wound up passing out in the tube, and I brought myself to hospital, and then after they did some blood tests they found that I had leukemia. People often ask the exact type of treatment that I got, and typically if you're diagnosed with leukemia, your doctors will make sure that you're in remission before you go to bone marrow transplant. And not everybody who's diagnosed with leukemia gets a bone marrow transplant, but in my case they decided it was really necessary. So I had my first 2 cycles of chemo in London, and then because I was going to do my bone marrow transplant in Ireland and moved everything over there, my transplant team in Ireland decided to change my donor, so they gave me another cycle of chemo to keep me in remission. But then my donor delayed, and I don't think that was anyone's fault. The delay could have happened for any reason, but I was given a half cycle of chemo in the interim to keep me in remission, and unfortunately I actually relapsed during that time. So then after that they gave me another cycle of chemo called flag chemo, which is very intense, and then after that thankfully I was in remission. So in January 2015, I went to transplant. The whole process took from the 27th of May in 2014 to January 2015. So during that whole time, I was doing chemo. So a lot of people ask me, did it hurt or was it painful? And the truth is that the actual transplantation process itself only took about 2 hours or so. It's basically just a blood transfusion where you get this bag of bone marrow into your veins, but it's everything around it that's painful and tiring. So I had about 6 or 7 months of chemo leading up to the transplant, and then about 2 years of recovery afterwards until I really got my full physical strength back, or at least most of my physical strength back. And during that time I would feel fatigued or sick and tired from the chemo. There would also be bone marrow biopsies where they take a sample of your bone marrow through your hip, or intrathecal injections into your spine, or I actually had a lot of joint pain after taking the corticoid steroids, which are another part of the treatment as well. So while the actual transplant process itself isn't painful, it's everything around it that does involve quite a bit of pain and discomfort. So a lot of people ask me if it changed my life, and I think the honest answer to that for me is that no, it didn't. But it definitely changed how I approach my life. So I definitely try and spend a lot more time with my friends and family, try to relax a lot more. I definitely value my connections with people way more. But I certainly didn't learn all of my lessons in one go. And it's taken me a few years, even after my transplant, to really realize everything that I should have learned. So unfortunately, one thing that has stayed with me after my transplant is that occasionally I will get scares. So I might feel like a pain in my neck or in my hip, that remind me of symptoms that I felt while I was sick. So I'll start to feel anxious and panicked about them and try and check in with my consultant to make sure that it's not a relapse. And it's at moments like that really make me consider everything that I've been doing so far and reevaluate. And it's actually a great opportunity to really think about what I'm doing with my time and my life and see if it's worthwhile. So yeah, I have frequent reminders that I'm very lucky even just to be here. So finally, one question that some people ask me is, will it come back, or have I gotten the all clear? And I think that it's a bit of a rude question, because if I answer yes, that it will come back, then that sort of casts a shadow over my life. And if I answer no, that it won't come back, I'm possibly being unrealistic, because you can never be sure. I've gotten the all clear, and I've relapsed after my transplant, but now it's back under control. I do take a drug every single day that controls my condition, and I've been taking it for the last 2 years. But really, you can never be sure, so I just try and live my life as best I can and not worry too much about the future. Yeah.